Dad, I ran my car into a ditch. I'm okay. Just come get me. Oh, shit.
1:54 a.m. The phone rings. A calm voice answers on the other end. Dad, I ran my car into a ditch. I'm okay. Just come get me. 19-year-old Brandon Swanson thinks he's only minutes from home. He's wrong. For the next 47 minutes, he walks through pitch-black farmland, talking to his father the entire time. He describes fences, fields, lights in the distance he's sure are the town of Lind. Everything sounds normal, controlled, fixable. Then, mid-sentence, his voice shifts. Oh, shit. And everything stops. Not the call, the voice. No scream, no struggle, no goodbye, just silence. His father keeps calling his name into the phone, again and again, but nothing comes back. Only the sound of an open line, and the empty dark on the other end. Brandon Swanson disappeared while still on the phone. His car was later found miles from where he thought he was. No phone, no trace, no explanation. People don't just vanish mid-conversation. But Brandon did. So, what happened in the exact moment that line went silent? And how does someone disappear without ever hanging up? Before that call, Brandon Swanson wasn't lost. Not yet. He was 19. A college student finishing his first year at Minnesota West in Canby, studying wind turbines, the kind of future that felt stable, practical, and within reach. He was the responsible one, the kid who checked in, the one his parents didn't have to worry about. That night, May 13th, 2008, he did what thousands of students were doing across the country. He went out. End of the semester. A few drinks, a long night with friends. Nothing unusual. Sometime after midnight, Brandon got into his car, a green Chevy Lumina, and started driving back toward Marshall. It was a route he thought he knew. Dark roads, open farmland, miles of nothing but gravel and silence. At some point the car slipped, just slightly, off the road, and into a shallow ditch. It wasn't violent, it wasn't dramatic, just enough to stop the car. Brandon didn't panic. He reached for his phone, dialed home. Dad. I'm stuck. Come get me. I'm fine. His voice was calm, certain. He told his parents he was just outside Lind, about 10 minutes away, but there was one problem. He wasn't. And in the darkness of those empty fields, Brandon stepped out of the car, believing he knew exactly where he was. He didn't. That call lasted 47 minutes. 47 minutes of a conversation that should have ended with headlights in the distance, and a ride home. Instead, it became the last connection anyone would ever have with Brandon Swanson. On the other end of the line, his parents listened. At first, nothing felt wrong. Brandon sounded like himself, calm, clear, certain. He told them he was near Lind, 10 minutes away. He could see lights in the distance, small, steady, familiar. So, they drove, following his directions, staying on the phone the entire time. And Brandon walked, along fence lines that stretched endlessly, through the dark, across open fields where the ground shifted under his feet, past the faint sound of running water somewhere nearby. A creek, maybe a drainage ditch, hard to tell in the dark. Every few minutes he would stop and ask, "Do you see my headlights yet?" His father would flash the truck's lights. Once, twice, again. Nothing. No response, no reflection. No sign that they were anywhere close to each other. Still, Brandon didn't panic. If anything, he sounded more certain. He kept adjusting his direction, kept moving toward the lights he believed were Lind. What he didn't know was that those lights weren't where he thought they were. And the farther he walked, the more wrong his sense of direction became. But on the phone, it still sounded like everything was under control, until it wasn't. Somewhere around 2:30 a.m., in the middle of a sentence, Brandon stopped. There was a shift. Small, but immediate. And then, oh, shit. 2 words, not shouted, not drawn out. Just enough fear to break through the calm, and then nothing. No footsteps, no breath, No voice. The line didn't disconnect. It stayed open. "Brandon! Brandon!" His father's voice cut into the silence. Sharp, urgent, desperate. Again and again. No answer. They kept driving. Faster now. Scanning the darkness. Looking for anything. A shape, a shadow, a sign. But there was nothing. They tried calling back. Once, twice. Over and over again. Voicemail. The conversation was over. But no one knew why. And then, days later, the truth began to shift. When investigators pulled the phone data, they found something that changed everything. Brandon wasn't near Lind. Not even close. He was more than 25 miles away. In the opposite direction, somewhere near the border of Lyon and Lincoln counties, near Taunton, the road he thought he recognized wasn't the road he was on. The lights he was following weren't leading him home. They were leading him deeper into the dark. His car was found later that morning, sitting quietly in a shallow ditch, door open, empty, no blood, no signs of a struggle, no indication that anything violent had happened there, just a car, left behind, and a voice that disappeared mid-sentence, because somewhere between one step and the next, Brandon Swanson stopped talking, and whatever made him say those two words was the last thing he ever experienced, before everything went silent. Dawn came quietly over Marshall. The sky lightened, the fields stretched out the same as they always had. But Brandon wasn't there. At 6:30 a.m., Annette Swanson called the police. Her son was missing. The response was measured, controlled, almost indifferent, a college student, end of the semester. Out late. He has the right to be missing. It wasn't said with cruelty, just routine. But routine doesn't fit a phone call that ends like that. While hours passed, Brandon's parents didn't wait. They searched, just the two of them, driving gravel roads, turning down empty farm paths, stopping, getting out, shouting his name into fields that carried sound but returned nothing. No officers, no search teams, no dogs, only distance and silence. By the time the tone changed, the window that mattered most had already begun to close. When phone data finally came in, the story shifted. Brandon hadn't been near Lind, not even close. His last signal placed him miles away, near Taunton along the Lincoln-Lyon County line, more than 25 miles off course. The map no longer made sense. Deputies located the green Chevy Lumina later that day. It sat angled in a shallow ditch. Driver's door open, still, undisturbed. Inside. His glasses, the pair he relied on, left behind. The keys were gone. Brandon was gone. There were no signs of a struggle, no indication of panic, no clear direction of travel, just a car, and an absence that didn't explain itself. That's when everything escalated. Search teams were called in. Volunteers flooded the area. Helicopters circled overhead. Dogs picked up a scent, followed it, across fields, past abandoned structures, through uneven ground that seemed to go on forever, nearly 3 miles until it stopped, at the edge of the Yellow Medicine River. The trail ended there, not faded, not scattered, ended. Boats were launched, the water was dragged, control gates were installed downstream to slow the current. Nothing surfaced, no clothing, no personal items, no sign that anyone had entered the water at all. And yet, that was the last direction anything pointed. Investigators were left with a timeline that refused to cooperate. For 47 minutes Brandon had been talking, describing fences, hearing water, walking with confidence, until the moment his voice changed. No build-up, no warning, just, oh, shit. And then silence. Not the kind of silence that follows a dropped call, the kind that stays. Because for a few seconds after that, the line was still open. His father was still there, listening, calling his name, waiting for something, anything, to come back through the phone. Nothing did. And by the time the search truly began, something else had already been lost. That same morning, road crews had graded the gravel roads in the area. Fresh layers of dirt, flattened surfaces, anything that might have been left behind. Footprints, movement, direction, was gone before anyone knew where to look. Time passed. Weeks became months. Months became years. The case was handed over to the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension in 2010. Tips came in, dozens of them, then more. Each one followed, each one ending the same way. Nothing. Foul play was never confirmed, but it was never ruled out either. No suspects, no charges, no physical evidence tying Brandon to any location beyond that last known path. Not even his phone was ever recovered. What remained wasn't a scene. It wasn't a sequence. It was a gap, a space between one moment and the next, where a person simply stopped being reachable. And in that space, there is still no answer. The investigation remains open. No arrests, no body, no explanation. Only that moment, fixed in time, a young man walking through darkness, mid-conversation, mid-step, and then gone. Because somewhere between one word and the next. Brandon Swanson never finished what he was about to say, and the line was never meant to go silent like that. 17 years later, the land hasn't changed. The same fields, the same roads, the same quiet stretch of Minnesota that swallowed a voice mid-sentence. But the moment that matters has never settled. What happened in the seconds after Brandon said, "Oh, shit"? Every theory begins in the same place. A young man, alone, walking through darkness, still connected to his father on the other end of the line. And then, something interrupts that connection. Theory 1. He lost his sense of direction. This is where the case often starts. Brandon believed he knew exactly where he was. He didn't. In total darkness across open farmland, even familiar terrain can become disorienting. Add alcohol, add fatigue, add limited vision in one eye. The brain fills in gaps, creates certainty where there isn't any. Brandon described fences, water, lights in the distance. All of it sounded real. All of it sounded accurate, but it wasn't. He wasn't near Lind. He was walking in the wrong direction, deeper into isolation with every step. This theory explains the confusion. It explains why he sounded calm, but it doesn't explain the break, because even lost people keep talking. And Brandon didn't just stop walking. He stopped mid-sentence, while still on the phone. Theory 2. The river took him. This is the most widely accepted explanation. Brandon mentioned hearing water. Search dogs followed his scent for nearly 3 miles, until it ended at the edge of the Yellow Medicine River. Spring runoff would have made the current fast. Cold, unforgiving. In the dark, one misstep, one slip on wet ground, and he could have gone in. If that happened, the river could have carried him, hidden him, buried any trace downstream. It explains the disappearance, but not the moment. Because if Brandon fell into the water, it would have happened while his father was still listening. There should have been something. A splash, a struggle, a shift in breath. There was none. Only 2 words. And then, silence. Theory 3. He fell into something hidden. This theory is harder to picture, but more difficult to dismiss. That region of Minnesota is dotted with abandoned structures, old farms, collapsed foundations, forgotten cisterns and dry wells, deep, narrow shafts, often hidden beneath grass and loose debris. In the dark, they don't look like danger. They look like ground. The theory suggests Brandon climbed a fence, stepped forward, and the ground simply gave way. If he fell straight down, there would be no time to react. No prolonged struggle, no second sentence, just, "Oh, shit," and then nothing. If his phone landed outside, the line would remain open. His father would hear exactly what he heard, the moment before the fall, and nothing after. No recovery, no evidence, no visible trace on the surface. Just the land, closing over what it took. Theory 4. Someone was out there. Foul play has never been confirmed, but it has never been ruled out. At 2:30 a.m., those roads are empty, and emptiness can hide people, a passing vehicle, someone who noticed the car, someone who saw a figure walking alone in the dark, and stopped. Sheriff Jack Vizecki once said, "Someone could have been in the shadows, and they got him that way." It's possible, but it raises a problem. Brandon was still on the phone. If someone approached him, if something escalated. His parents should have heard it. Movement, voices, a struggle. They didn't. Only a brief break in tone, 2 words, and then nothing. Theory 5. Something we still don't understand. There is one possibility that doesn't fit neatly into any category, because every theory explains something and fails somewhere else. The river explains the disappearance, but not the silence. Disorientation explains the path, but not the sudden stop. A fall explains the break, but leaves no trace. Foul play explains the vanishing, but not the absence of sound. Every answer reaches a point, and then collapses, which leaves one final reality. Whatever happened to Brandon Swanson happened fast. Fast enough that he didn't finish his sentence. Fast enough that no one on the other end of the phone had time to understand it. And silent enough that 17 years later, we still don't know what interrupted him. Because in that final moment, he wasn't alone. His father was still there, listening. And even now, there is still no explanation for why the line didn't end, but the voice did. There's something unsettling about this case, not just because Brandon Swanson disappeared, but because there may be no one to blame. Most true crime stories give us something to examine, a suspect, a pattern, a motive. This one doesn't, and that's where it breaks, because when there's no one to point at, we're forced to look somewhere else, not at a killer, but at the human mind itself, because what happened that night may not have been driven by violence, but by perception. And that's far more dangerous than it sounds. The illusion of knowing ao tuong vesu hiu biet. Brandon sounded certain. That's the detail people keep coming back to. He wasn't panicked. He wasn't confused. He wasn't asking for help in the way lost people usually do. He was giving directions, describing landmarks, moving forward with confidence, while still on the phone. And that's exactly what makes it dangerous. Because the human brain is built to create certainty, even when it doesn't have enough information, in low visibility, in unfamiliar terrain, under stress. The brain fills in gaps. It takes fragments, a fence, a distant light, the sound of water, and builds a story around them, a story that feels real, consistent, convincing, but isn't. This is called perceptual completion, the mind's way of forcing clarity onto uncertainty. And in extreme conditions, it can quietly become fatal. Because once the brain believes it understands where it is, it stops questioning, and Brandon stopped questioning. Confidence without awareness. Su tutintiu nhanthak. But here's the part that makes it worse. There's another layer. Brandon had been drinking, not heavily, but enough. Alcohol doesn't just slow reaction time, it shifts perception. It makes confidence feel stronger than it should be, and doubt feel weaker than it needs to be. So a person doesn't feel lost, even when they are. Now combine that with fatigue, darkness, and limited vision in one eye. And something subtle begins to happen, something dangerous. A person becomes wrong, but completely sure they are right. And that kind of certainty doesn't correct itself. It compounds, step by step, decision by decision, further away from reality, while sounding completely in control on the phone. The final seconds, nung jae koi kung. Now consider the moment everything changed. For 47 minutes. Brandon was stable, talking, walking, thinking, still connected, still being heard. Then suddenly, his voice breaks. Oh, shit. That shift matters, more than anything else in this case, because it tells us something precise. Whatever he saw, or felt, was immediate, not gradual. There was no build-up, no hesitation, no time to explain, just recognition. And then, nothing. In psychological terms, this kind of reaction points to a sudden environmental threat. Not emotional, not interpersonal, physical, immediate, unavoidable. Something that didn't give him time to finish the sentence he had already started. The absence of sound suvang bong kwa tan. But here's what most people overlook. Not what we hear. What we don't. The silence. Because for a few seconds after those words, the line was still open. His father was still there, listening. If there had been a struggle, he would have heard it. If there had been movement, he would have heard it. If there had been time, Brandon would have said something else. He didn't, which tells us something critical. This wasn't chaos. It wasn't drawn out. It was interruption. Fast, clean, final. The kind that doesn't echo, because it doesn't give you time to react. No offender, but still a pattern. Chong kathuas. Nung van kromat kwon mau. This case doesn't fit traditional criminal psychology. There is no confirmed predator, no manipulation, no escalating intent, and that's what makes it harder to process, because we're used to blaming someone, but here, there may be no one, and yet, there is still a pattern, a human one, overconfidence in uncertain environments, trust in flawed perception, movement toward perceived safety, that isn't actually there. And by the time reality corrects the mistake, it doesn't correct it gently. It corrects it all at once. The victim's mind. Tam tri qua nan han. There's a question people keep asking. Why didn't he stop? Why didn't he stay by the car? But that question assumes something important, that he knew he was in danger. He didn't. From his perspective, he was solving the problem, getting closer, doing exactly what he was supposed to do, still talking, still connected, still being heard. And that's what makes this case so difficult to accept, because Brandon didn't walk into danger thinking it was danger. He walked into it, believing it was the way out. Final insight, kai, ninsao sak koi kung. In the end, this case doesn't show us the mind of a killer. It shows us something far more uncomfortable, how easily the human brain can convince itself it understands the world, even when it doesn't, and how quickly that certainty can collapse. Because somewhere in the dark, between one step and the next, Brandon Swanson realized something was wrong, and he only had time to say 2 words. He didn't hang up. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't even get to finish the thought, because whatever corrected his perception did it instantly. And in that exact moment, while the line was still open, Brandon Swanson stopped being heard. Not because the call ended, but because something ended him, before he could say anything else. There's one detail people remember about this case, the voice. For 47 minutes, Brandon Swanson was calm, talking, walking, describing the world around him as if he understood it. And then, oh shit. Most people treat that moment as the ending, the point where everything went wrong. But what if it wasn't? What if that moment was the first time things became clear? Because for nearly an hour before that, Brandon believed he knew where he was. He believed the lights ahead were safety. He believed he was close. He believed he was moving in the right direction, and none of that was true. The twist in this case isn't what happened after those 2 words, it's what happened before them, because the most dangerous part of that night wasn't the darkness, it was certainty. The human mind doesn't like not knowing, so it fills in the gaps, creates patterns, builds a version of reality that feels complete, even when it's built on fragments. A fence becomes a boundary, a distant light becomes a town, the sound of water becomes a landmark. And slowly, a person stops searching for truth and starts following a story. Brandon wasn't wandering aimlessly. He was navigating, confidently, logically, step by step, just in the wrong direction. And here's what makes that terrifying. Because nothing about that process feels like a mistake while it's happening. It feels like progress. That's the blind spot. We don't recognize we're lost until something forces us to. And for Brandon, that realization came in a single moment. Not gradual, not explained, just, oh, shit. 2 words that may not signal fear of something new, but recognition of something already wrong. And by the time that realization arrived, it was too late to act on it. That's the part we don't like to sit with, because it suggests something uncomfortable. That danger doesn't always come from outside. Sometimes it comes from the way we interpret what's in front of us. From assumptions we don't question, from confidence we don't examine, and from the quiet belief that we understand where we are, even when we don't. This case doesn't give us a killer. It gives us a mirror, a reminder that under the right conditions, darkness, isolation, fatigue, anyone can misread the world around them. And once that misreading becomes reality, it doesn't correct itself gently. It collapses. all at once, and sometimes there's only enough time to notice it, not enough time to escape it. Because Brandon Swanson didn't disappear when the call ended. He disappeared while it was still happening, still connected, still being heard, and maybe that's the most unsettling truth of all, that the line didn't go dead. The world around him just changed, faster than he could understand it. And somewhere between certainty and realization, a voice stopped mid-sentence, and no one has ever been able to explain. What he saw in the moment, he finally realized he was wrong. Brandon Swanson walked into the dark, believing he knew exactly where he was going. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't lost, at least not to himself. He was thinking, moving, getting closer, at least that's what it felt like. And then, in the middle of a sentence, everything stopped. 17 years later, there are still no answers, no moment anyone can point to and say, that's where it happened. Only a call that never truly ended, and a silence that never gave anything back. If you've made it this far, take a second. Think about the last time you felt certain you were right, certain you understood what was in front of you. Because sometimes the most dangerous mistake you can make is not realizing you're wrong until the moment you can't fix it. If you have any information about Brandon Swanson's disappearance, please contact the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. Even the smallest detail could matter. And if stories like this stay with you, the ones that don't give easy answers, consider subscribing. Because some cases aren't about what we know. They're about how easily we can believe we're on the right path, while walking deeper into the dark. And somewhere out there on a quiet stretch of road between one step and the next, a voice stopped mid-sentence, and no one has ever heard how it was supposed to end.